Hi, folks. Welcome back to This Meeting Should Have Been a Podcast. I'm your host, Tom Schin, and I'm excited to be here with my good friend, Katie Navara Bradley. She has all these different names, and I never know which one to use. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But Katie's a good friend of mine in the leadership space, and we've been collaborating, working on stuff. I don't know. We've been yakking back and forth for years now, and so I'm excited to bring her to the show. So welcome, Katie. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Tom. Thank you for the invite to join you on your show. I'm a big fan of your podcast. And I think you reminded me that we actually met years ago, like more than 15 plus years ago, and jobs took us in different directions. And several years ago, we got reconnected and, do spend a lot of time sharing ideas and collaborating on different leadership and HR type work. So it's always a pleasure to work with you on a project.
Yeah, I think it went all the way back. Was it Pat Ryan that introduced us?
It was. You have a better memory than I do. It was
It-
through a
uh,
networking group.
yeah. Yeah. I think it was Metroland Executives, which I,
Yes.
I always laughed at the name. I'm like, I am nowhere near the thought I have of what an executive is. But okay, I'll play in the sandbox. But yeah, I think I was in that group for 6 or 7 years. A lot of fun, great people. I don't see many of them very often anymore. Once in a while, I'll trip across Pat, or if I'm down by his shop, I'll stop in and say hello. But it's a while. I'm not down that way too much. So, but thankful for you being here, and thankful for the continued friendship. And I know we've gone on some speaking tours as well, and we have to kind of revisit some of that in the near future. But I wanted to catch up and introduce our audience to you. I know we talk a lot when we get together. We talk a lot about leadership principles and crazy things that people are doing. And so I wanted to see what was on your plate these days, because it's been a while, and we have these moments. I know you talk quite a bit about thought leadership, and so I thought let's bring that into the conversation and talk a little bit about that, what it is, what you're doing in and around it. Because I know a lot of your business tends to be around the content creation on the writing side, but this is another pocket of what's made you successful. So tell me a little bit more about what you've been up to in this thought leadership piece.
Sure. So, yes, life seems to be crazy for everyone. Time only keeps going faster. And as you mentioned, I do have a content strategy and creation company where I help brands and small businesses with all kinds of content, from blog posts to case studies, white papers, webinar scripts, anything that supports their marketing efforts through content. But one of the subsets that I've really been focusing a lot on lately is, as you mentioned, thought leadership. And so, for listeners who may not be familiar what thought leadership is, that is, sharing your perspective on trending topics in your field of expertise to help gain visibility and traction online. And it's always been important. It could show up in things like newsletters or in your blogs. Now, a lot of times it's on LinkedIn or platforms that you can pay to be a part of and submit pieces that then get a wider audience. It's become even more important now because of some of the changes with AI and how search is working. SEO is not dead. SEO is still there, but a lot of the AI bots and things like ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, they're sourcing information from authentic original content. So things like those thought leadership pieces being quoted in trade publications or other publications where you are seen as the subject matter expert. So it's really increased in importance in raising your visibility and your brand.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that with you mentioned LinkedIn, and so much of my feed seems to be people creating infographics or the artificial image of themselves, or using the AI headshot creators and so forth. And I gotta imagine from a LinkedIn standpoint, it's almost created white noise. There's so much in there that you don't really know what's real, what's transparent versus what the bots are creating or what people are relying on bots. And it just goes to show you that the value of somebody like yourself helping someone through, whether it's the content creation side or the equine assisted therapy that you do, through their challenges, through how their thought processes work. makes such a big difference. Um, and I know you use horses extensively, but I mean, we were talking beforehand about the all the challenges you have with this horse coming and that horse going, and like you have all these horses, but they're all over the place. But anyway, what are you finding with that whole AI in LinkedIn space and how it's interfering with things? What muddying of waters do you see out there?
That is a very broad question. So I'll hit on a couple of things from what I am seeing. I can tell you with work from an international association that I work with, carousels are really standing out in LinkedIn. So if you create carousel content, that can be a way to piece up different pieces that you're putting out in your business. You can take content that you wrote for a newsletter or a blog post and segment it into carousels. And that seems to really be helping people boost their algorithm views. The other, though, is we can get really deep into what I call AI tells. There is a very well known publisher that I do contract editing for where people can pay to be a part of the platform, submit their thought leadership, and then leverage that platform's audience to gain more visibility. And increasingly, we are seeing multiple AI tells, and it's showing up there, and it's also showing up on LinkedIn because I think people are creating their content for LinkedIn first. And, the tells are multiple short stories. It's not X, it's Y. Um, or I should say multiple short sentences. So you get sentences that are 4 words long, and another sentence that's 3 words long. It's not this, it's that. The word quietly, friction. I mean, there are things that start to show up. I mentioned to you earlier that just this week I was editing a piece and the title was almost exactly identical to a piece that I edited the week before. And so it's becoming very, very, very clear that people are using AI increasingly. And one of the big challenges, one of the big challenges is people don't want to read that anymore. They're tuning it
No,
out. They can tell that it's not authentic. The AI search engines can tell that it's not authentic. But then you just start to sound like everyone else. And you
that's
mentioned the
just
horse.
it. That's
Yeah,
just it. You got to separate yourself from the crowd. I mean, if you're a business trying to hire a vendor, and I can remember back in my sales days where I was selling different solutions, people were like, "How are you different?" Well, now everybody sounds the same. I'm like, well, it's almost like I don't use that as my bread and butter to drive this. I mean, we can talk about AI until we're blue in the face. We end up talking about it every episode. And it's one of those great tool, leverage it as a tool, but don't make it the center point of everything. It's so funny to see. I think I was having this conversation about, all the infographics and everything, and it looks exactly the same from one person to the next. I'm like, now I've learned this from my friend Claire, those little 3 dots up in the top right. If I keep seeing the same message from you or it sounds exactly the same, I'm tuning you out. I do it in other social platforms. I'm like, I just can't. It's not interesting. To your point, me as a consumer of information, I want original thought. I want original examples. I want a story. I want to be entertained and educated at the same time. And it's just not doing that.
Yep. Well, and you mentioned the horse piece. So the way that I differentiate myself when I talk about leadership development culture is I relate it to what I observe working with my horses every day or through my whole lifetime. Horses are prey animals, so their number one priority is survival, but their herds also have very distinct social hierarchies and relationships that we can all learn from in our business worlds. And so I take some of those same things that we all hear about leadership development and culture and whatnot, and I put it through the lens of what my horses have done recently or something that I've been thinking on. And all of a sudden now it's really unique and interesting. And, I've had people, I was just at a meeting last week where someone said to me, I just love your posts on LinkedIn because they're just unique. Yes, you're talking about leadership, you're talking about all the things that we pay a lot of money to go sit in conference centers and hear about, but it's different. And then it sticks because it's different.
I know I've teach you before because you've done the baby horse thing. I've got my secondary baby horse here on my desk, but I think it would be great if you could, bring almost you need a couple people in a horse costume to come on stage and work with that as your next speaking engagement. I think that would give everyone a good chuckle, but also, what is it called, a pantomime horse or something like that.
Yeah.
Have a way to kind of bridge a concept and somebody act like the horse without having to actually obviously bringing a horse to a conference would be crazy, both stressful for the horse, but everyone else too. And then you think of the messes. But I digress. I think the examples that you must get out of using Winston and the others for just different talking points and how to connect and how to listen and feel for what the room is saying is just such a unique angle. What have your outcomes been? I know when people come to your workshops and your sessions, they're thrilled. I'm curious, like a month, 2 months, 3 months down the road from that, what does that sound and feel like to you when you talk to them again or on an ongoing basis?
It has been quite surprising because I am a horse girl, for lack of better words. And sometimes, I have to be really cognizant that I'm not just in the echo chamber talking about horses because that also then does not have the educational value. And so people will say to me, I remember reading your post about one recent one was we had Winston x-rayed because he kept tripping. And short story is he needed a pair of special shoes. And it was this theme of removing friction before it becomes a point that causes pain, and then you don't want to do something because it's painful. And she's not a horse person, and she specifically mentioned that that post. And so what it's been leading to is hopefully getting people to engage with inviting me in for some speaking opportunities. So I'm actually going to two conferences in October as a keynote speaker, but also, we offer in person opportunities to interact in a facilitated way with horses and experience that behavior firsthand, where everybody's working on the ground. There's no riding. You don't even have to, we say, know the nose from the tail. But we work through a series of on the ground exercises, and the conversations that come out of that have been, wow, I didn't think about how this translates into my team. And just things that people even, I had the quad graphics team out 4 or 5 years ago before they closed this location. And I have run into some of those executives out in the community, and they still talk about what they learned that day. So
That's
there's just
amazing.
something about working with horses. Yeah.
Well, and it's one of those, it's not like they need to be there every week. Not that you're opposed to it, but you get that one or two experiences and it's just a game changer for how you're thinking about life. I know I get examples. I coach at a gym as well, separate of this, and I get little tidbits from the folks that are guiding me along in terms of what I say and what I'm doing. I wrote a piece the other day about this where I didn't realize it, but you stand in the middle of the room, but I was always looking left. And I would never have thought differently. I sort of glance right, but I'm like, I'm right handed. I'm going to face that way. I don't know. It's just a natural inclination until he pointed it out. Now I'm super aware of it. I just needed that one example just to point out that one little thing. And now it's memorable. And those connection points happen all over the place. So those executives, is no surprise, right? You have a very memorable style and approach, and you don't really see a ton of people doing what you do. I'm sure there's others. I know you've run into some. I've talked to folks on the West Coast who have some semblance of using horses in some of the work that they do, but your approach has always been unique to me, and I've always admired that. So it's great when you see people recognizing you for that and tying the lessons back. And to me, that's always the magic when you work in a leadership space. When people come back, oh, there's always really I use this piece of advice and da da da. Da.
Yeah. I will say, I would love to say that I was the inventor of this great idea. I was not. There are some very, very skilled facilitators who, so you mentioned that equine therapy. We actually call it equine-assisted learning slash coaching because we are not on the therapy side. But there are some very skilled individuals who moved it from therapy to coaching and learning and professional development. And they're working with companies globally, like Deloitte and IBM and Google, so um, yeah, and I think other people are doing it, they just don't talk about it. And so I'm trying to raise the visibility, bring some of that work to the capital region. I've also traveled a little bit as people have requested. So just helping bring awareness.
Yeah, and I'm surprised. So, listeners, viewers, Katie and I are up in the Saratoga Springs area, so we have a racetrack that's busy all summer long every year, and so there's a lot of visibility from the horsing world here. So I'm again almost doubly so. I'm surprised we don't hear more about it here. So it's nice that you're in that vertical because there's not a lot of folks giving it the attention it deserves. So I'm curious how things have evolved for you. We were talking about AI and how we need to shift our content to be more real, if you will, on LinkedIn and other platforms. What are you finding how impact the positives and the negative impacts that AI is having on that trajectory, on that element of being real? Where are you finding it most applicable? And what are maybe the one or two kind of things that you're running into that are on a slippery slope of, yikes, Terminator?
Yeah. Yeah. So, definitely that over reliance on AI so that everything starts to sound the same. I also talk a lot about, and I hope that people realize that everything that comes out of an AI must be fact checked. Um, you know, at a speaking engagement I did last fall, I mentioned that Deloitte had been hired by a client to create a report on AI. And after the report was turned over, it was a million plus project. Nobody fact checked it, and they found out that there were a lot of inaccuracies because it
Expect.
was all written by AI, right? And so, actually, after I gave that presentation, I had somebody approach me who wanted to write a book to launch his consulting practice. And he's like, I want to hire you. I've been using AI to understand what it's like to work with a ghostwriter to create an outline for my book. He goes, but I'm convinced I'm going to hire you so that I don't get into trouble. The other piece of it is, as it stands today, the US copyright does not recognize AI written content. So if you want copyrightable material, it needs to be original. There are certainly ways to use AI. Like I love it for brainstorming. I do love it as a place to start for research and then go and check those sources to make sure that they're accurate or start digging and finding other pieces. It can also be really helpful for doing spell check or making sure that all the space, checking the details on your work before you hit publish if you don't have an editor. So I'm not saying don't use AI. I'm just saying be aware of the limitations and use it carefully. Know what you're getting into.
Yeah, I like it for a little bit of a bias control for myself. What am I not thinking of? I've pointed out X and Y and Z. If I'm looking at an RFP or if I'm reviewing notes for an interaction, what am I missing, right? What are key things that other people might catch in this dialogue that I've taken a transcript of? What portions of this have I missed or am I not addressing? Or if I'm writing a proposal, did I nail everything? So I'll use it in that regard in terms of a checks and balances. Just again, us solo folks who work on our own, you don't have that team of folks to go review documents, and to read 35 pages of stuff is frankly painful. But again, it's a tool. It's a set of extra eyes, and then again, it's not going to catch everything. I still got to go spell check on my own and use all that stuff. But I like it for that sounding board, and I know I've used it a few times for like presentations that I rehearse for. I'll record myself in a Zoom environment and then I'll spit in, I want you to rate this scale of 1 to 5, one always, five never sort of thing. And it'll rate me. And sometimes it's, I always laugh because it says, you're amazing. This was amazing. This was brilliant. I'm like, I'm the most brilliant person AI knows. But at the same token, I'm like, I want you to tell me what I'm doing wrong. I want you to tell me what I could be doing better. And so after it gets to the brilliant part, then it goes into you could think about this, think about that, and you take what makes sense to you in your own style. But I like it for that part. Because then it always gives me two or three things that I just didn't consider. Um, and I know the last thing that I did recently, I didn't run it through that. And I should have, because I would have caught something that I thought, I'm like, this would have been better as a print form versus an online form. Sort of.
Yep. Well, and you actually had suggested that to me. And so I use it in that way as well, especially, as I mentioned earlier, to make sure that when I talk about the lesson from the horses, that it ties back to something meaningful. And so I will run things through there that I've written and just say, what am I missing about the leadership or HR connection? And that will help me see if I've got it in the first go around or if I need to consider adding something else. But yeah, using it as part of your check and then the human decision after that piece.
Yeah. Yeah. And great. I love tools. I love tech, but it does get a little overwhelming. And, it makes me think of different scenarios that come up in the working world that are just too crazy to imagine. Like, this is stuff real. And so in my digging, I know I sent you this article. It was from Cheeseburger, which I know I consider it a little bit more in the parody space, but it was this article, as I think the Cheeseburger, Cheez burger, had this piece about just the crazy expectations that some employees end up with because of the managers. And these are people that you and I will help in terms of fixing some of these things. But some of the quotes in there, there was one piece, and we'll talk through this, where this individual is working for a manufacturer, and they wanted to change some of the testing procedures, but the person said, all right, as soon as I said we're making these changes, people had a hissy fit, for lack of a better way of putting it, meaning you can't make changes like this without input from everybody. So the person schedules this meeting, invites the 20 or so, whatever number of people to it. No one shows up. So then I'll put this quote in there. They say in there, sent the new procedure back out with a note. All those who attended the review meeting agreed with the changes that we're making. And so everybody was happy. I'm like, the absurdity of those things where people just aren't communicating makes me laugh. What did you think of that article? Was there anything that stood out to you?
Of course, it made me laugh right off as well. And it automatically took me to a previous work experience. The employer will remain nameless.
Oh,
but there was one where, even though I was on the executive team, we were not allowed to call 911 in an emergency unless it went through the executive director or the assistant executive director first. And, it was, to me, thankfully, I never had to be in that situation where I had to make the decision, but I'm like, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. Absolutely, if I think somebody's dying, I'm going to call 911. But it's one of those things like, you have to do it this way. Nobody thinks about the downstream consequences. And then you circle back and they're like, oh, yep, all's good. Move
oh.
along.
The micromanaging that must exist in that place as well. And there's tons of others. You know it. I know it. We talk about it. We hear about it. And then you get into these discussions with other organizations, you find out they have the same challenges and problems. And the root of it to me has always been, if you don't trust your people to make decisions, then either you have an issue or you have the wrong person in that position. And so either let's help them get the skills they need so you do trust them, set a benchmark for, here's how I can trust you. Here's how you can demonstrate that you've earned my trust, or they're in the wrong role and they need to be put into something else. Either that or they're going to figure out this micromanaging shit is for the birds. I'm out. Which is probably the more likely picture. Um, yeah, that's craziness to have to ask the boss. To me, I've always been taught, ask for permission, not for forgiveness, and that's probably gotten me in some trouble over the years.
Well, it was really an interesting experience because I went from the job I had previous to that was managing an entire distributorship location at like 23 years old, where my boss was 2.5 hours away. So I went from having complete autonomy. I mean, granted, certainly there were things I was always double checking, but like complete autonomy, hiring, managing, running a store, inventory, to you cannot call 911 in an emergency. And so then when I went to a place after that, somebody said to me, "Why didn't you ask for a garbage can in your office?" And I was like, "I didn't know I could ask for a garbage." So it's like so funny how they condition you to, like, you know, just complete autonomy. No, it's got to be this way. And then when you come out of that situation, it's like, okay, where's the line again of what's acceptable in this workplace and what's not? And that's one thing I love about the work we do now as consultants is we get to make our own rules, and then we get to also help other leaders maybe see some of the blind spots and how to work through those.
Well, that example that you gave with the garbage can is perfect. I use similar stories with clients of mine where we take for granted what is seen, what is unseen, what good experiences, what bad experiences people have had, or just and it may not be from a place of evil or anything. It's just this is not how we did things, and so I never knew that I could ask these questions. And so I know I spend a lot of time talking to folks about, well, again, to that point of bias control with AI tools. What am I not asking? What am I not learning about? Um, and so it invites conversations to learn a little bit more about. I was in a meeting this morning. Not a lot of people showed up. It was a networking sort of thing. And so we just went around the table and just started talking about different stories and connecting on different things, which was awesome. It just made way more sense to learn a little about more about one another in a less formal session that didn't need it. And so I know it's challenging for businesses to think that way because it's all about the bottom line and profit and so on and so forth. But making time for conversation in the water cooler is just so valuable.
Mhm. Absolutely. It all comes back to trust, and that's where trust happens is in those casual spur of the moment conversations that come about throughout the
Yeah.
working relationship.
I have to imagine that's one of the better lessons you get from the equine side of things. Um, is learning where that trust takes place, especially with large animals like horses, where if they don't trust you, they're not moving.
It does come down to trust. I mentioned earlier that they're prey animals, so their one priority in life is survival. I mean, even though they are domesticated and they do not have to worry about being chased by a wolf, it is still survival. Trust me, we have coyotes that have traversed our property, and I've seen one horse get completely scared, and then others be like, whatever. Um, but it's trust, and the other big thing is congruence. So they are the best bullshit detectors you've ever wanted to meet because. We talk about needing to fake it till you make it. You do have to project confidence sometimes in situations where maybe you're not the most comfortable or it's pushing you. But there's also this inner alignment, and they will tell you right off if you are aligned or not. And if you're not, good luck getting them to move their feet even 3 steps. And they help you find that center, even if it's, being vulnerable. I'm terrified in the moment because of XYZ decision, or this is really outside of anything I've ever done before. Even just showing that changes the whole dynamic.
So, how would you translate that for our listeners in terms of a takeaway lesson, almost a freebie lesson that you can give them in their current state? How do we tackle some of that trust issue with others, with our bosses, with our direct reports, with our colleagues?
I guess if I could offer two pieces of learning from that, it would be to be congruent. Even if you are uncomfortable in the situation, be honest and transparent about it with those that you're leading. I think we feel a lot of times as leaders that we need to have all of the answers or get everything perfect, and that's where we tend to get into trouble. So being being honest about what we're feeling in the moment, even though that can be hard. Um, and then the other piece of it is watching, observing what others around us need from us in the moment. Um, we can get so focused on how we think we need to react or what we think we're perceiving, but we don't know until we ask the question. And so it really starts with, well, how does that land for you? Or what am I, to your point, what am I missing? And so just getting really curious about the situation.
I love that. I think it goes to the point where, again, a lot of people who moved into managerial roles or leadership roles are there because they're a great individual contributor. They were go getters, high achievers. And so, in some shape or form, they were the problem solvers and they turn into this manager. And their instinct is always, let me solve that for you. I can do it. I'll do that for you. Or here, just give it to me versus what you just said, which is being in that observational curiosity mindset to think, how are they interpreting this? What's the root cause that they're, I mean, unless you're coming from a scientific world, there's a lot of root cause analysis there. But I find those conversations are some of the most enlightening because you get to have them think about first, shut up. Second, listen to what the person's telling you, not just in words, but in feelings and emotion and context. There's always more to it that uh, newer managers just it escapes them, and it's not for intent. It's just you haven't gone through enough to have experienced what that feels like.
You reminded me also, it allows us to open our mind to other ways of doing things. And I know we're also good friends with Jennifer Massey.
Oh
And
yeah, yeah.
yeah, a couple weeks ago, we co facilitated an equine leadership lab. And we had 7 people come. They were each leaders within different organizations. And one of the activities we included was we split them into 2 groups. They needed to build and design an obstacle course and get the horse to move through the obstacle course with them. And when I've done this exercise with different teams, it is always fascinating to me to watch their thought making process on what their obstacle course looks like, and then how they're going to pick which horse they're going to work with and how they get it accomplished. In that particular one, an individual came from a manufacturing plant, and before his team went, he went through with a rake and traced out their whole pattern in the dirt with the rake. And I was like, that is amazing. I've never seen anybody do that in all the programs that I've done. For me, one of my struggles as a business owner has been to create some standard operating procedures, some SOPs. For him, it was natural. This was his SOP to his team to get them aligned. And for them, it worked. And so it's taking that moment to ask and to see different perspectives really brings forth some really unique ideas. You may not be able to use them all. I mean, we can't use all of the ideas that come to light, but just being able to consider them and where they fit or might work and enhance our workflow is really fascinating to me.
That's the beauty of the group think where you have different people from all over. I think that's an awesome example of let's just be open to what's possible. And I think the benefit of having a bunch of strangers together is there's no preconceived notions, there's no ego check. It's just sort of, I want to share with you what I'm thinking, and I want to hear what you have to say too. And we forget that when we're working the same people every day, day in, week in, month in and out throughout the whole year. And it's sort of the same example we use when taking advantage of our families, not in a horrible way, but we forget, right? This is just, we need to be cognizant of the fact that we need to ask better questions. We need to be better listeners. My wife teases me about that a lot. She'll come and just plop down next to me while I'm doom scrolling in my phone. I'm like, oh, I have to put that down. It's listening time. And see, I'll get kudos. I don't get the dog treat or anything like that, but there are times where I get it right, and I see the smile on her face. They're like, "Good job." I
Yeah.
get all
I feel bad I've been doing that to we all fall into this, especially when you're solopreneurs. I think this week has been incredibly busy, and my dad's been trying to tell me like all these different things about different things that they're doing. And I'll be like, I have no idea what he just said, but I'm going to play it off as I did. Like, okay, yep, all right. you know, and then I kick myself because it's like, what would it really cost me to not multitask for 20 minutes?
it's technology has made it really hard for a lot of folks, and unless you get to the point where you can be super disciplined or have some sort of tool or widget, I think that's probably the next thing to add to my toolkit is the anti-technology widget. I'll have to think about that. Thanks for the brainstorm.
You're
Um,
welcome. Tell
but
me what
yeah,
you figure out.
I know. It's so distracting. I know I made a mental note a few weeks ago that once I'm done with dinner and checking things, I want to do my best to try and not bring my phone into the living room. Just plug it in at 7, 8 o'clock and just leave it be. Part of that is I'm building a Lego set in the other room, so I have a little bit of a distraction. Uh, but it's also to not dive into it. My wife, we go through battles where not her and I, but the challenge of not getting sucked into the reels and the videos of woodworking and animals and all that stuff. And they're all fun, but an hour goes by and you're like, what the hell just happened?
Exactly. Exactly. I mean,
Well, Kate,
there's value to some of it because then I know what's going on because I'm not always the most informed. But to your point, then you spend hours of just drainage.
yeah, if I could have my mind set on, I can watch 3 clips. I've got to be choosy about what they are. Then I could probably be a bit more successful with it. I think the timepiece has been my widget now to play with. Um, and then just not pick it back up for the rest of the night, unless there's like a sports event or something going on. But yeah, it's I've been sort of, I would give myself a D plus so far, but I'll keep working it. I think it's something I have to do for myself to keep myself sane. But
Yep, same
again,
here.
it's the same example we run into. I know I have leaders that I'll work with where it's the device is always going off, the watch is going off. I'm like, all right, let's turn everything on mute, take it off, put it. It's like when you go to the concert that has no recordings, you got to put everything in a bag. Same thing.
Yep,
So,
exactly.
well, Katie, this has been great. I so appreciate the conversation. I love how uh, we've gone into so many different pieces, from the LinkedIn carousel content to your congruency and observation notes. I know we could, I mean, you and I, when we talk for an hour and change and just keep going until we realize, crap, I got to go. But I so appreciate you being here. Tell our listeners where they can find you, and we'll include that in the show notes. What's the best way to get in touch with you if they have questions about stuff?
Sure. So, absolutely on LinkedIn. You can find me there, connect, reach out. I also have two different websites, katienavara.com and katiethecoach.com. And both of those have contact forms, and would love to answer any questions your listeners have. And to your point, I love our conversation. So, thank you for inviting me on today.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks so much, folks, for listening to This Meeting Should Have Been a Podcast. We'll see you at our next episode, and share, like, comment, tell your friends about us so that way we can continue these conversations for many, many, many years.